Alright, let's get this out of the way now. You've been jabaited. I clickbaited you. The roguelike in this title isn't free per se, like technically, by the literal definition. Now, hold on. Don't click that back button. Give me a chance, you motherfucker. God of War Valhalla is a brand new DLC for God of War Ragnarok, and yes, you do have to buy Ragnarok to get access to it. But Valhalla itself is an almost completely self-contained roguelike game mode, and it's entirely free if you have the base game. This DLC is so well executed, and as both a fan of the God of War franchise and the roguelike genre, how could I possibly not make a video about this game? It's like Santa Monica Studios has been watching my channel and made this game specifically for me personally. I went into Valhalla with pretty modest expectations. Don't get me wrong, I felt pretty sure I was going to have a good time on the premise of a God of War roguelike alone. I imagined God of War combat with some roguelike elements of random enemy encounters, with non-linear stage progressions, and some randomization of stats or equipment loadouts, with some runic attack changing with every death, and to top this roguelike Sunday off, perhaps a bit of light story elements or dialogue sprinkled throughout. And if you were to ask someone to give the most basic, surface-level, cursory description of Valhalla, this would be pretty accurate. But Valhalla is not only this and more, it's also the depth of that more, and the polish with which it's delivered that truly caught me off guard. Valhalla delivers far more plot, character interaction and development, storytelling, and unique cinematic moments than I would have guessed, with fully voiced lines by all the main cast, including some old, long-forgotten faces and voices. Nothing is half-assed or phoned in. The voice performance and art, the environmental detail, the writing, every last aspect of this DLC is as polished and well-presented as anything Santa Monica Studios has ever produced. Narratively, there's a surprising amount of meat on the bone in Valhalla, and while fans of this series will likely get to play the next God of War without having to spend time in Valhalla, we do get to see a surprising amount of exploration of Kratos as a person outside of the broader, more grandiose events of the main games. Instead of these earth-shattering events that redefine the pantheon of gods and mythos, Valhalla keeps its focus firmly upon our titular God of War, as Kratos introspectively examines his own history in an attempt to make peace with the man he is now and the monster he used to be. A roguelike is, by nature, cyclical. They're designed to be played and replayed, with the many repeated runs randomizing every time. In most cases, roguelikes are entirely driven by gameplay alone, with any plot or story development ranging from cursory backstory that minimally develops over the course of the game's runtime, or just entirely absent. Some recent roguelike titles have become notable exceptions to this trend, with Hades and Returnal both delivering solid narrative and story developments throughout their respective games. Valhalla follows the trend of these stellar roguelikes, further cracking the code on how to deliver phenomenal storytelling and narrative developments while maintaining the roguelike cycle. And I gotta say, I was impressed by how well Valhalla really nailed its storytelling. The DLC is packed full of moments in its story which waste no time in giving us slowly developing, natural-feeling banter between Kratos and Mimir and several other characters on top of the unfolding plot. Not only does this DLC hit the perfect spot of drip-feeding the player bits of narrative and story elements between each stage of the run, but it also handles its gameplay mechanics, roguelike elements, and unlockable features masterfully, doling out one at a time in that slow drip that makes every run, whether it be a success or failure, meaningful and worthwhile. Valhalla smartly opens these assets up slowly over the course of many runs rather than just dumping every option immediately at your feet, which serves to both ease players who may be unfamiliar with roguelikes into the process to avoid confusing them with the sheer variety of variables and randomized elements, but this slow trickle also serves to give the player continuous motivation throughout every run to unlock new assets in order to further aid your runs throughout the future. This game also does a fantastic job of connecting its unlocking upgrades and systems to its narrative beats, making these expansive options meaningful as they tie to the story of Kratos' progressive work through Valhalla's challenges, along with his own reflections upon himself, his history, and his nature as a god and a man. As for the gameplay itself, if you've played God of War 2018 and Ragnarok, you know what to expect here, as Valhalla doesn't exactly reinvent the wheel of its tried and true combat. That said, Santa Monica Studios are nothing short of mad geniuses, given how they kept the combat mechanics at the core of Ragnarok, but also managed to incorporate roguelike elements affecting your runic attacks, stats, and various effects which all tie into your weaponry and build choice. This can present both an all-new challenge, as the randomized nature of selecting runes and power-ups, you can't just sit on your most familiar and reliable builds from the base game. But this change also gives you the opportunity to craft more expansive builds that can actually become far more powerful than anything Ragnarok offered. Crafting builds that completely break the game and turn Kratos into an even more unstoppable killing machine is yet more evidence that someone at Santa Monica Studios really understands what makes a good roguelike so incredibly appealing. Because, let's be honest, if you can't even make a build that breaks the game, what's the point? And the kicker about all this is Valhalla is free. It is hands down the best free roguelike on the market. And from what I've seen of other free roguelikes, it's not even close. But there is, of course, the caveat that you have to own God of War Ragnarok to play the Valhalla DLC. So obviously, if you don't have Ragnarok, Valhalla won't be, strictly speaking, free. If you don't want to scoop up Ragnarok, fair enough, I get it. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. That said, I honestly believe the value of Ragnarok alone is well worth the price tag for the full game, especially if you catch it on a discount at some point. Because Ragnarok itself is an incredibly high quality game full of fantastic narratives, some wonderfully fleshed out characters, and great gameplay that is well worth the time it takes to play through. Especially if you complete the full range of optional content that should get you well past 60 hours of quality, engaging playtime. And when you add in the extra content you get from Valhalla, the full value of Ragnarok plus its DLC, it's just... I would have gladly paid for this DLC just on the quality of the gameplay, the roguelike mechanics, and the story presentation. While it isn't the longest roguelike I've ever played, there's enough meat on the bone in both gameplay challenge and narrative development to more than make this worth the price of most DLCs. Not to mention, there are multiple difficulty settings that increase the challenge of the battles while also providing players with even more loot and upgrades to craft interesting builds with on the run. The fact that Santa Monica Studios made a whole DLC of expansive content that ties into the main game but also cooked up an entirely different genre of game from the core Ragnarok experience and gave it to fans for free is mind-blowing to me. It shows just how committed Santa Monica Studios is to providing value and quality experiences to their player base. As a longtime fan of roguelikes, the genre's development over the past several years has been wonderful to see. Titles like Hades, Returnal, and now God of War Valhalla have brought in a higher grade of production quality and story presentation the genre was largely lacking in the past. And now The Last of Us 2 has a roguelike mode looming on the horizon, and we can only hope it continues this trend of more high-quality, narrative-rich roguelikes stepping forward. Whether it be all-new IPs or spin-offs of beloved games made by indie studios or AAA, roguelikes are starting to take more of their share in the gaming market, carving out an ever-growing and evolving niche among the greats, and I honestly couldn't be happier to see it.